I'd been living in my apartment for about a year. Nothing fancy about it. Just a small, older place in a quiet part of town. Good enough for someone like me who preferred things simple. My neighbors were perfect, quiet and mostly kept to themselves. We'd barely even nod at each other in the hallway, which was fine with me. No loud noises, no prying eyes. Just peace and quiet. But about a month ago, that peace started to break. It happened gradually, and I didn't even notice at first. It started as a weird feeling, like a creepy, uncomfortable feeling that would hit me late at night, long after the usual city sounds died down. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, convinced someone was watching me. I figured it was just stress or maybe my imagination. But night after night, that feeling stayed, sticking to me like a bad dream. Then, one night, as I lay there trying to ignore that creepy feeling, I started to hear noises from the apartment next door. The walls in this building are paper thin, and sometimes you can hear bits of conversation or a TV, or maybe the floorboards creaking. But this was different. It was faint, just a soft, shuffling noise, like someone walking around. And something else. A low whisper, like someone whispering under their breath. I sat up, trying to listen, but then it stopped, just dead silence. I kept staring at the wall, waiting for it to start again, but the silence was complete. Still, I felt weirded out. My neighbors had always been silent as the grave, and there was something about those whispers that gave me the chills, like something wasn't right. The next few days, I tried to brush it off, but that feeling of being watched only grew worse, especially when I saw my neighbors in the hallway. They were there every morning, just like always, but I started noticing things. They never spoke, not even a word. They'd pass me with blank looks, eyes not even meeting mine, faces completely empty, like there was nothing going on behind their eyes. I'd give a little nod, but it was like they didn't even see me. Their skin looked pale, almost grayish under the hallway lights. The quiet in the building felt heavier after that. Each time I heard those whispers or the soft footsteps late at night, that prickle of fear would come back, worse than before. It was like the whole building was holding its breath, like it knew something was about to happen. Then, one evening, something happened that made everything change. I was heading out to grab groceries, already trying to shake off the usual sense of dread, when I noticed something weird. The door to the apartment next to mine was slightly open. That door was always shut tight, like its owners were. I hesitated, glancing around the hall to make sure no one was around. Curiosity got the best of me, and I stepped closer, peeking through the small crack. Inside, it was dark. I could just make out a sliver of light coming from what looked like a single bare light bulb in the back. As my eyes adjusted, I saw them, shadows, figures standing perfectly still. They weren't moving, not talking. They were just there, facing the wall, like they were in some kind of trance. A chill ran down my spine, and I quickly stepped back, heart pounding. I practically ran down the stairs, telling myself I was imagining things. But that image was stuck in my mind, those silent figures standing there like statues. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. When I came back that night, my hands were shaking as I reached for my door. As I slid my key in, I froze. The door was slightly open. I knew I had locked it. I always locked it. A cold wave of fear hit me, but I pushed the door open, heart pounding. Everything looked the same, just as I'd left it. Except for one thing. On my kitchen table was a small piece of paper, folded neatly in half. I knew I hadn't left anything there. I picked it up, hands shaking. The note was blank except for one quick, scrawled message: "Stop looking." My stomach dropped. Someone had been inside my apartment, and whoever it was, they knew I'd looked inside my neighbor's place. But why? Who would go to such lengths to scare me? I thought of those silent figures standing in the darkness, and an icy dread settled over me. I tried to sleep that night, but every sound made me flinch. The radiator clanged once, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. I couldn't get the image of those figures out of my head, couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't normal. I thought about calling the landlord, or maybe the cops, but what would I say? That my neighbors were creepy? That they left a note? They'd think I was crazy. The next night, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. I waited until just after dark, then left my apartment, heading toward my neighbor's door. I was done ignoring whatever was going on here. If they wanted me to stop looking, I had every reason to keep looking. I stood outside their door, listening. Silence. I could hear my own shallow breathing. Finally, I raised my hand and knocked. 3 quick taps that echoed down the empty hallway. No response. After a long pause, I reached for the handle. It turned easily in my hand. I pushed the door open slowly, peering into the darkness. The apartment was just as I'd seen it before. Dark, with that same dim bulb casting weird shadows across the room. And they were there. The figures. Standing exactly where I'd seen them, facing the wall. Completely still. But this time, one of them moved. My breath caught as one of the figures slowly turned to face me. The dim light showed a face, if you could call it that. The skin was stretched tight over its bones, pale and almost see-through. Its eyes were empty, just dark holes, and its mouth hung open in a strange way, like it was frozen mid-scream. And then, as I stood there frozen in fear, the other figures turned too, each one staring at me with those hollow, empty eyes. Panic hit me, and I took a shaky step back. But before I could move any further, something cold and hard wrapped around my wrist. A hand, as cold as ice. It pulled me forward, dragging me into the darkness. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The darkness swallowed me. When I woke up, I was lying in my own bed, drenched in sweat. My apartment was quiet, untouched. Had it all been a nightmare? But it felt too real, too clear. My head throbbed, and I sat up slowly, trying to make sense of it all. I told myself it was a dream, just some awful nightmare. But then, I saw it. On my kitchen table, in the exact same spot as before, was the note. This time, the message was different. I picked it up, my hands shaking so badly I could barely read the words. "You should have listened." I stared at the note for a long time, my pulse pounding in my ears. "You should have listened." The words were burned into my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I barely slept that night, and when I did, I kept seeing those empty eyes, staring through me. I heard whispers that seemed to echo inside my skull, like they were crawling into my head and taking root. The next night, I woke to the sound of soft, shuffling footsteps outside my bedroom door. My heart pounded as I lay frozen in bed, listening as the footsteps grew louder, closer. Then they stopped just outside my door. I stared at the ceiling, too afraid to move, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Then I heard it, a soft, scraping sound, like nails slowly scratching along the door. And then someone whispered my name. I tried to move, to get up, but my body wouldn't respond. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, choking me with fear. The doorknob started to turn, so slowly. It was torture. I could only stare, my body stiff with dread, as the door creaked open. Standing in the doorway were the figures from my neighbor's apartment, their hollow, dark eyes fixed on me. Their mouths were twisted into wide, unnatural smiles. One of them stepped forward, reaching a hand toward me, its fingers bony and deathly pale. My body finally reacted. I bolted upright, scrambling off the bed, backing against the wall. I was trapped. They stepped closer, filling the room. I could smell the sickly, damp odor of decay as they closed in on me, hands reaching. They pressed closer and closer until I was suffocating in darkness. The last thing I remember was one of those twisted faces, leaning inches from mine, its empty eyes boring into me as it whispered,
"You were warned."
When I woke up, I was no longer in my room. I was standing in the dark, cold room of my neighbor's apartment, facing the wall, frozen and unable to move. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My body felt locked, stiff as stone, like I was a part of the building itself. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move, a new face, stepping slowly into the room. A new tenant, staring in horror at the figures standing by the wall, including me.